Hey everybody, this is Games Plus James and welcome to a brand new tutorial series here on YouTube where we're going to take a look at how to make your very own Endless Runner game. Now for anyone who doesn't know what an Endless Runner game is, I've just set up this very quick example of the type of thing we'll be doing here. It's basically where your character just keeps running along through the world and you jump up and down on things and jump and try not to die and fall down holes and get trapped and stuff, stuck on ledges, stuff like that. So this is just a very quick example of what we're going to do. And so, rather than sit here looking at what we're going to do, let's start making it right now. So, we're going to need to start a new project. So, we'll go up here, or when you first open Unity, you will get this display. We get this thing here. We can start a new project. So, we're going to set it to 2D, because this is just a sideways little runner guy. You can... Although we've set it as a 2D, you can use 3D models if you wanted to or anything like that. This is just a handy way of setting up Unity so it'll look at everything from the side just the way we want it to. So we're going to call this Endless Runner. I'm going to set this up to go to the right place. I was obviously testing stuff out before we started. I'm going to pop that. Okay, we're going to create this project now. And once our project is open, we can start adding things to the game. Now, before we do anything else, my setup of my screen is like this, but if you were starting a brand new project or starting Unity for the first time, or you may have had different projects going on, your windows might be laid out slightly different. So if you don't know already, to get your windows set up in the same way that I have them set up here, if you go to Window up here in the top and then Layouts and 2x3. 2x3 is the setting that I use here, and I find it pretty handy. You're able to get access to all the things you need. So that's the way I like to start off my projects. So first we're going to need a player that we're going to use. So I'm just going to create a folder here. I'm going to call it Art. By right clicking in here we can create a new folder and we're just going to name it Art. And what we're going to do is the files will be linked down below in the description of the video. And we're actually going to use art from a person named Kenny, who makes awesome, amazing open source artwork that's free to use in your own games and free to use for stuff like tutorials here. Obviously you're better off using your own sprites and stuff like that, but we're going to use this guy's stuff because they're free and open source, and like I said, the link will be down below so you can go and download the files yourself. So once you download the files and extract them, you'll have a bunch of stuff here. So what we're going to do is go into Sprite Sheets and go to Sprite Sheet Players.png, and we're going to grab that and drag it into our art folder here. And once that is loaded in, give it a second, go in here. So we need to set up this file so that it'll work right within our game. So what we're going to do is under sprite mode here, we're going to set that to multiple. Our pixels per unit is going to be 128 because that's just the size of the character that we'll be using. Our filter mode even, will be point. Our max size, as if you look down here, this is the dimensions of the file. So its biggest number is 2048. So we already have 2048 selected here, but if you click on it, you can see a drop down of other options. So if you're using a different size, you want to make sure you pick the biggest possible size you can that accommodates whatever image you're using. We don't want it to be compressed, we want it to be true color. We're going to hit apply to make those changes. And we're going to pop into the Sprite Editor here. And if we zoom in, we're just going to pick, let's go for this little green guy. We're going to draw a little box around him, just like this. And what we're going to do is zoom in so that we can see that the very edges of it are touching this character. So we can see his feet is touching there. If we grab this corner, we want to go to the edge of the arm here. So we're just going to go like that. You can see there's a very faint bit there. So we want to make sure we're outside that. But actually look, we can see the top of his little bubble thing here is out further. So we'll move this back out 1 pixel. And I've accidentally dragged it up. And we'll do the same up here. So we'll move this over so it's touching that, and at the top it's touching as well. So we have the right size, it's touching our box perfectly. So now that we have this little box, we're going to get our pivot point here. Actually no, we'll leave that alone. We're going to apply these changes. No, actually, sorry, I'm wrong. We need to put this at the bottom. That's where we need to put it, so that the character rotates or anything, which we won't want them to do anyway, but everything will be set to the bottom of the character. So we're going to apply these changes and we're going to close out of that. So now on our sprite file here, if we hit this little arrow to the side of it, we've got one little guy. We're going to click on him and we're going to drag him in here, and now we've got a nice little character for us to play around with. but we need somewhere for him to stand on the ground. So we're just going to quickly go up here. We're going to go to game object, and we're going to go to 3D object and cube. And that creates a nice little cube here. We're going to click on these arrows and we're going to drag it down just to the bottom here. And on the scale, we're going to set the X scale to be a bit larger, so it's more than just one little block. We'll set this to say 12. That's probably big enough for now. Well, let's make it 15 actually. There we go. Perfect. Now, because we want to work in 2D with this character stuff, we've just created a 3D object, and we don't want to use 3D objects or 3D physics within Unity to mix with our 2D physics, which is what we want to use. So over here on our cube, we have a box collider, and this is a 3D box collider, and that's not what we want to use at all. So we're going to click on this little gear here and remove that component. We're going to add component here, and if you type into this little search box at the top, we're going to type in box collider 2D, and what that does, it'll create a box around the object perfectly for us. So now there's a 2D box collider on this. So now we've got a little bit of ground and we've got a player, but if we hit play, absolutely nothing will happen once it starts. Our player is just floating in the sky there, and there's some ground. So let's make him fall to the ground. So we'll go back to our player here. Actually, we'll rename him to the player rather than just being a strange sprite sheet name. And we're going to add a component to this guy. We're going to add a box collider 2D to him as well. And the reason we add that is so that when he hits the ground, which we've already given a box collider 2D to this thing, those two box colliders will interact with each other, and they'll realize that, oh, we've hit something, so we can stop doing stuff. We can stop trying to fall anymore. And yeah, that's fine. And what we also want to add to him is a Rigidbody 2D. And what the Rigidbody 2D does is basically that creates gravity on our player, so that we're able to, he'll be able to fall down to the ground and be able to do stuff. And we'll be able to apply physics to this character using our Rigidbody. So if we hit play here, you see he drops down to the ground, and we can pick him up again and he'll drop down again. Pick him up and he'll drop. And if we mess with some of the stuff here, for example our gravity scale, if we set that to 5, pop back down, he falls a little bit faster. If we set it to say 5,000, we drag him up, he fell so fast he fell through the ground. So obviously you want to be careful with your gravity scale, but the thing is, once something is running like this in Unity, and once you stop it running, it goes back to the values it had before it started running. So our gravity scale is back to 1 again, so we're all happy. We don't have to worry about that too much. Let's move our player down to the ground a little bit closer here. So now we have a Rigidbody on our player, so he has gravity, and we have a cube down below. But one thing with the way this stuff is set up by default within Unity is this character can also rotate. So if we hit play here again, and we just, as we can see, he's like that. If we pick him up and drag him, actually if we just pick him and slightly rotate him a little bit, so he can wobble and he can fall over. That's not really what we want to happen here at all, and which would be a really bad problem if, for example, if we just play it again here, if I just right click on this and create a duplicate, say we put it up here like this, and we move our player and he just lands on the corner like that, and then, oh, he falls over and suddenly he's sideways doing weird stuff. So we don't want the player to be able to do that. And the way to stop that happening is on our Rigidbody here. If we go to constraints and we freeze rotation. So basically now, if we run the same thing again and create another copy of this cube, create a duplicate, drag it up here. Now if we move the player onto the corner of the object, he's hanging over the edge like that. Now he'll just stay there. He won't be able to rotate and fall to the ground. So now obviously we're making an endless runner, so we want our character to always be able to stay upright. So we'll freeze the rotation so he'll always stay that way. Okay, so now we've got the basics of our character. We need to make him be able to move, and the most important thing, we need to make him be able to jump as well. So we'll go back to our folders here. If we click on assets, and we'll create another new folder. We'll call this scripts. And we'll go into that folder, and I will right click on this and create a C# script, and we're going to call this script player controller. with a capital P and a capital C. And we're going to double click on that now to open it up in MonoDevelop. And we're going to write a very straightforward and a very simple script for our character. It won't be anything too complicated or too in-depth. Apparently it doesn't want to open up for me. Here we go. Now it's loading. It's going to be very straightforward and very simple, like I was saying. So we'll need two values to give our player. We need the speed that he's going to move at and the force that he's going to use to jump up in the air. And so we're going to create two values for that. So we're going to say public. And public just means that within the Unity editor here, we'll be able to edit the value, basically. So public float, which is a type of number. You get floats, you can get ints, which are the main kind of ones that we'll use within our series here. So we got a public float, so we have a public number that we're able to edit, and we're going to call this the move speed. And then below that, we're going to type public float again. So this will be another number that we can edit, and we're going to call this the jump force. So now, just to show how that looks in the editor, we'll save that, go back in here, and what we're going to do is go to our player. We have to wait for it to finish compiling down here in the corner, and we'll go to our player. We'll go down to add component here, and we're going to type in our little search box here. We'll just start typing player and we'll get it automatically. We'll find our player controller. So we're going to click on that and add it to our script. And now, because we created move speed and jump force values, we've got some little values in here that we can add to the player. Obviously, at the moment, they won't do anything. But we're going to set the move speed to be around about 10 and the jump force to be about 10 also. Actually, we set the move speed to be about 5 just so he won't be going too fast. Obviously, you can play around with the numbers. You'll see how they work now in a second. So if we go back here, what we want to do is we're going to be affecting the rigid body that we've added to our character. So we're going to need to be able to interact with that rigid body. So we're going to have to create another value here, and we're going to say this is private because we don't want to be able to mess with this value from within the editor. We just want the scripts to be able to mess with this itself. Or specifically, we want this script only to be able to mess with the physics of the character. So we're going to say private rigidbody 2D. Rigidbody 2D is the name of the component that we're going to be affecting here. So that's why we say rigidbody 2D. And what we're going to call this variable is my rigid body. So that's just to say that this is the rigid body that belongs to this script, or to the object that this script is attached to, basically. So in this, so down below here, now that we've got our variables set up, we've got two separate little things down here. We've got a start function and an update function, and basically the way these are like basic elements built into Unity. So within these curly brackets, anything that we place in here, any bit of code we place in here, will be carried out as soon as Unity starts up for the first time, or as soon as our level is loaded up for the first time, or anything like that. Basically, as soon as this script is seen within Unity or within the game, it'll immediately run this little bit, and then update is run every single frame that happens within the game. So potentially hundreds of times a second, or as low as, if your game is running really badly, maybe 5 frames a second. But if that's what's happening, you're in a bad situation. That won't be something we'll run into with our very simple endless runner here. So in the start function, which is called straight away, we're going to say my rigid body is equal to get component. So what get component does is it'll search on the object that this script is attached to, and we know that this script is attached to our player script, our player object, which is down here. So what it'll do, it'll search on the player, and it'll search if we put in these little sharp brackets, and inside this sharp bracket we're going to say rigid body 2D. So it'll search on the player object for the rigid body 2D, which is one we have right here, and we just have to put some open and close brackets just there at the end like that, and then at the end of the line we put a semicolon. And you have to remember within when you're coding in C#, at the end of every line, you have to have a little semicolon like that at the end of every statement within the game or within your code. So now we have our rigid body, and the system has been able to find a rigid body, so now we're able to interact with that rigid body and give it some force and do some fun things. So if we go down to update, our update loop here, what we're going to say is, well, because this is an endless runner game, we don't want to control the direction of the player. We just want him always to be moving forward. So what we're going to say here is my rigid body dot velocity. So what this does is this is accessing the velocity of the rigid body, and velocity is the speed of the player's movement. So we're going to say my rigid body 2D, or my rigid body dot velocity is equal to new vector 2. And what a vector 2 is essentially, it's just an X and a Y value. So if you remember your graphs from back in school, you had your X going along horizontally and Y going up and down. So a vector 2 is essentially just 2 points, an X point and a Y point, separated by a little comma like that. So before the comma, for our X value, what we're going to say is, okay, we want to set the velocity of the player to be the move speed. So our X value will be our move speed. So we'll pop in here, move speed, just like that. And in general, unless the character is jumping, which is what we're going to deal with in a second, we don't want to be affecting the Y value at all. So we're going to leave that as it already is. And the way we do that is say my rigid body dot velocity dot Y. And that'll just get the value that's already been stored in the Y. And what we're saying is we're not changing that, we're leaving that the exact same. So we'll just put a semicolon at the end of that statement, save that, and then we're going to pop back into Unity just to see that in action. We'll actually move the player, once it's finished compiling down the corner here, we'll just move the player back a little bit further so he has some space to move. And if we hit play now, we should see the player, he'll drop down to the ground and he'll just continue. There he goes, he's walking along just the way we want him to. Perfect. But we don't want him just walking along like that, we want to be able to jump. So we're going to go in here, and within our update loop here, we're going to add a little way to check and see if the character should be jumping. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to say if, and then an open bracket. We'll just talk about how if statements work. So an if statement is basically a way of checking if a certain thing is true, then run this little bit of code. So we'll say we have if, and then we have some brackets, and then within these brackets, this is the bit that we want to be checking and see if it's true. And then after that, we have some curly brackets, just like this. And within that will be the bit of code we run if the thing that we're checking is true. So in this, we're going to say if input dot get key down key code dot space and a close bracket. So what we're saying here is if any input is taken, or we're accessing input. So if the Unity detects any input, and the type of input we're looking for is a key being pressed on the keyboard, and that specific key that we're looking for is the spacebar. So anytime the spacebar is pressed, our character will jump. And we also want to check if the mouse is being pressed at the same time. And the way we can do that is saying input dot get mouse button down, and some more curly or normal brackets, and within these brackets we want to say 0, because on our mouse in general there's 3 buttons. You might have a crazy mouse with more buttons, I don't know, but generally speaking, mice have a left click, a right click, and the middle button click. and they all have values. So 0 is left click, 1 is right click, and 2 is the middle mouse button. And basically what we want to do is check if the middle mouse, or if the left click, sorry, is pressed on our game, then that'll make our character jump as well. And this will be how, for example, if you were to run this on a mobile or anything like that, anytime the player tapped the screen, then that would make the character jump in the exact same way. So now we've got these two things that we're checking. But if we were to leave it like this, this wouldn't make any sense to Unity. It would say if we're input is space, but we have input, get mouse button down, we have these two things here, and Unity has no way of telling which is which. So what we want to say is, in plain English, if the person is pressing space, or if the mouse button is being pressed. And the way to represent or is with two little vertical bars, just like that, on your keyboard. They're in strange places depending on different keyboards, but you should be able to find them. So we've got either the character can press space or the mouse button is pressed down. And if either of those things are true, we want to make the character jump. So much like we did here, we're going to take this myRigidbody.velocity in between our curly brackets, and we're going to say myRigidbody.velocity is equal to new vector2 again. And in here, we're not going to want to change the x value because we want to make sure the character is still moving along, going clattering along at the full speed. So we're going to say myRigidbody.velocity.x. And for the y value, we're going to put in our jump force. So now, if we type in jump force, just like that. And of course, it's always very important in Unity to make sure that all your letters are capitalized the exact same way, and of course your words are spelt the same way. If your letters aren't capitalized the same, it'll bring you errors in the game. So you need to always make sure that you capitalize things properly and make sure everything is spelled properly. But of course everyone makes mistakes, and you're inevitably going to spell things wrong and make capital letters wrong. So if you have an error in the game and you can't understand why you've got that error, the first thing to check is always, do I have something just slightly misspelled? Because that happens to everybody the whole time. There's no way around it. You're inevitably going to make those mistakes. So now that we have that saved, we're going to pop back into Unity. We're going to wait for it to compile down the bottom here again. And once that's going, now we saw our player walking or running along. But now, once it goes here, our player can jump. He's jumping a bit high there like that now. That's because we've given him an extremely high jump force. And he's also falling very, very, very slow. So, since he's jumping so high and falling so slow, what we're going to do is go to the gravity scale on our rigid body. We're going to set this to 5. If we hit play again, we should get a bit more of a better looking jump. So if we jump him, up, there we go. Now he's not jumping so high, and he's falling really, really fast. Much more, it feels a little bit more snappy for our character to be able to fall that much faster within our game. He's not jumping high enough now though, so we're going to jump him a little bit more. And if we go in here, there we go. Now he's jumping like a mad fella. But the thing is, he's able to just keep on jumping just like that, and that's not really something we want to do. So in the next episode, we're going to take a look at how to make sure that the character can only jump when his feet are planted firmly on the ground, and how to make sure that we know when the player is touching the ground and when he's in the air. And of course, before we wrap up this video, we need to save this scene that we've made here. So what we're going to do is go to our assets folder again. We're going to right click here, create a folder, and we're going to call this folder scenes, and then open that up. And then up here, we're going to go to file, save scene. And it opens up our assets folder here. It's going to go into scenes, and we're going to call this scene endless, because this will be our main part of our game where all the endless running action takes place. So yes, come back in the second part of this series and we will take a look at those things, and we will continue making our endless running platform game. Thanks for checking out this episode, and if you want even more Games Plus James goodness, make sure you hit those subscribe and like buttons. You can also find me on Twitter and Facebook by following the links on screen, where you can find out all the latest news about the channel. And if you want to help support the show, check out the Patreon page, where you can get exclusive content in return for helping make the channel even better. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more.